If you think you know which way it's going to go, make your bet at Sports Interaction. Guys, Super Bowl 57.
What is that?
Woo! You never heard of the Super Bowl?
No.
It's a bowl and it's super.
I've never heard of 57.
Check it out. You can get all the action at Sports Interaction. Pre-game, live and play. Prop bets are great. My favorite one is the Rihanna one. Which song is she going to lead with? And I think there's a healthy debate to be had about it. Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now to see all that sports betting has to offer. If you want to bet, it's sportsinteraction.com/STPN. Or in Ontario, you can download the app using the QR code on your screen. 19 plus, please play responsibly. Gary Bettman was asked a lot of things at the All-Star press conference, which he always gives, and he'll give answers that infuriate you. Now, one of the things I think it's really important that you know and that we understand the context before we go into this, okay? Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid in successive months have said the NHL needs to go back to, or they would prefer it goes back to a 1 versus 8.
And Gary said, I agree.
Bettman says it's complicated. Debate of a 1v8, it's just not just that. You've also got to look at then changing the wild card. And then you've got to start looking at the matchups in terms of how many times everybody's playing everybody else if you're having conference-based playoffs. Now, a lot of people were quick to point out, and they're right, that the last time they changed it, all of those things happened. Everybody was happy with the previous seeding format. Nobody wanted to change. The NHL did, and they managed to find their way through it. But what's important about this, guys, is that when you have Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby saying it, the commissioner is compelled to answer it. And when you have Connor McDavid and Sidney Crosby saying it, you as a fan know that the NHL players, a good chunk of them, share the same frustrations that we do.
Yep.
And usually, when that happens, things change. Now, I'm going to give you an example. Do you remember that Alexander Ovechkin used to wear a tinted visor?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you know why he stopped?
It became against the rules, I think.
This is what Ovi said. Marty Brodeur started crying to the league, I can't see his eyes. And he's like, what are you talking about? So it was Marty Brodeur. And also Marty Brodeur got another rule change. Do you remember the Sean Avery rule? Where Sean was waving his stick in Marty's face? There was nothing illegal about that. Still, I'm not sure what's wrong with that. But
he's not touching him.
But the league said you can't do it. No waving of the stick. No distracting Marty.
That's resulted in a grand total of 1 goal getting called back ever, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's such a needless, pointless rule, and yet Sean Avery, creative enough to come up with something that pissed Brodeur off enough that he was able to call the NHL, and the NHL literally enacted the rule within a week.
Within a couple of days. Lost mid-playoff series, by the way. You cannot change rules mid-season.
But you can.
But you can, if you don't care about the integrity of your sport enough. And they don't, so that's why they changed the rule. And lost in all that is it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
He got scored on that power play, but it was after because Marty was so cheesed. But it wasn't while he was having his eyes taken away.
Here's why the NHL doesn't want to go back to a 1v8. The NHL and its owners want to go to an 84-game schedule, which is something that they had in the mid-90s for a couple of seasons.
Yes.
I'm going to give you a few excerpts from Gord Miller, who had a great thread on this on Twitter. He says, as it stands now, teams play clubs from the other conference twice, 32 games. The other division in their conference 3 times, and their own division 3 to 4 times. Under this format, 1 to 8 conference makes sense as teams are playing in very similar schedules. However, that format, combined with scheduling issues, has caused problems, including a relative lack of intra-divisional games. You remember the Leafs used to play the Habs, the Bruins, anybody else in their division when there were 3 divisions per conference, sometimes 6 to 8 times a year.
I think it was 8 at its height.
And that's when we had real divisions rather than these quarter-off divisions, these 25% of the league divisions that we have. The format, combined with scheduling issues, has caused problems, including a relative lack of intra-divisional games, which, regardless of the strength of the teams that are the biggest sellers at the gate, for the most part, the biggest drivers of TV ratings, basically, there's no intensity because they're not playing each other enough. This season, for example, the Islanders and Rangers and Flames and Oilers only play each other 3 times. And he says, worse yet, they don't meet again this season.
That is bad.
The Islanders and Rangers last played December 22nd. The Flames at Edmonton last played December 27th. A proposal is circulating to boost divisional rivalries by A, reducing the number of preseason games from 8 to 5.
Agree with that.
And expanding the regular season from 82 to 84 games. Number 2, going strictly divisional playoff format for the first 2 rounds with a possible play-in. Under the proposal, teams would play home and away versus the other conference, which is 32 games of the schedule, along with other divisions in the conference, 16 games of the schedule, and that would leave 36 games against divisional opponents, meaning they would play divisional rivals 5 times and the 6th additional matchup. This issue with the schedule format is a question of whether the 1-8 conference playoffs would be fair, since teams that are playing in a very different schedule may not, like, let's say you got one division that's strong and one division that's weak. If they weight the divisions heavily in terms of games, and the Atlantic Division, which is easily the best division in the sport, at least at the top, is playing each other a bunch of times, people are going to say, well, that's not fair because they're playing each other a bunch of times in the regular season.
That isn't that baseball?
Right. So Gord Miller says that's where the proposed play-in format comes in. The top 5 teams from each division would make the playoffs. The 4th and 5th place teams would each meet in a best of 3 play-in round. As of today, that would be like Buffalo, Florida, Pittsburgh, Washington, Colorado, Nashville, Calgary, Edmonton. Expanding the playoff field from 16 to 20 teams has been talked about for a while, not gained much traction. The play-in format has met with resistance, specifically from Gary Bettman. No perfect solution, but the current system isn't working on several levels. Can a compromise of the 1-8 playoff format with more division-heavy schedule work? The NHL has some games worth 3 points, others worth 2, so anything is possible.
So, like, I'm just looking at...
Like, that's what's being weighed here.
I'm just looking at 4 versus 5 in each division right now. You have the Caps taking on the Penguins.
Yep.
Yeah, sign me up to watch that. I'll definitely watch that.
Absolutely.
Colorado versus Nashville.
I think that'd be, rematch from last year.
Yeah, it'd be a good series, but one team is in a playoff spot right now, the other is not. Edmonton versus Calgary.
Mm-hmm.
Sign me up for that, but one team is in the playoffs right now, the other is not. And this is the very bad one, though.
Mm-hmm.
In the Atlantic, you know who 4 versus 5 is?
Mm-hmm.
Buffalo versus Florida. Dude, what? Buffalo, neither of those teams are in a playoff spot.
Yeah, they were almost there. Why did they have to throw in the ridiculous, hey, you got to have a divisional first 2 rounds of the playoffs? Why did we have to do that? Why couldn't we just have 1 through 8 and then you fix the 84 game schedule? Because 84 makes sense. They should 100% go to 84 games. It's divisible by 32. Simple. Easy math, you know, you get the conference, you get the divisional games in there and it divides easy and everybody plays a fair amount of games. And then just go back to 1 through 8. Like, why did you have to keep adding on this? Oh, and then we need a divisional round of the playoffs. No, just play 1 through 8.
Travis Yost tweeted this, and it gives you an idea of how often divisional talent imbalances can create poor seeding. So in 13-14, the St. Louis Blues took on the Chicago Blackhawks. The Blues had 111 points. The Blackhawks had 107 first round. Next year,
so bad.
Same thing. St. Louis 107, Chicago 103. 16-17, Washington, Pittsburgh 11-108. 111-108.
Wow.
Boston, Toronto 112-105. Toronto, Tampa Bay 115-110. And then Minnesota, St. Louis 113-109.
No,
Two teams with over 110 points played each other in the first round.
It makes no sense to do the divisional seeding in the
That's
playoffs.
so
Like
bad.
the regular season is there so you can earn a seed in the playoffs, and your seed should be playing the lower teams in the conference.
Yeah.
Like that's it.
Right. And here's the problem is what they've done with the playoffs is, and the playoffs are great. They really are the strength of the sport. The NHL playoffs are wonderful.
Every playoff in everything is incredible.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
But the NHL playoffs are their highlight.
Yeah, they're great.
Here's what you've done though, right? You've taken the best teams, oftentimes some of the bigger markets, right?
Mhm.
And you're matching them up and having these all-star first and second round series. You get to the conference final.
And you don't care.
And well, we care if we're in it.
Yes.
But we need NHL fans to care. And this is where it becomes a little bit like, you know, if you're a Colorado Avalanche fan, yeah, you were fucking in it. You were singing all the small things. You were in it.
Of course.
I get it, and
Oilers,
I get that.
absolutely.
I get that. But what this essentially, unfortunately, eliminates, sometimes you get a 1 versus 8, and the 8 wins, and then they win again, and all of a sudden you got a Cinderella in the conference final.
Fun.
I don't want to see 1 versus 2 until the conference final. That's when I want to see you.
What I think it does sometimes is it makes the first round the highlight.
And you're front loading the playoffs. So then by the Stanley Cup, and I hate to say this, guys, the Stanley Cup that's where the ratings drop off. That's where they should be right. Like the Super Bowl is like the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
The NHL, it's like the first round, and we're down.
And then it dips. I'll give you an example. When they showed the map of the United States in 2019, who was rooting for who in the NBA final?
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I didn't think they cared. But, it was just such a fish out of water situation as a Toronto sports fan. Like, what? All these people have opinions about my local sports team.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just so not used to that.
I've never seen so many people just mad at Canada.
Happy.
Just angry. No, angry.
People were cheering for the Raptors to beat Golden State. Because Golden State had a stranglehold on the NBA final. It was Golden State versus LeBron for how many consecutive years?
Yeah.
And people were like, something different. Oh my God. And they were going for the Raptors purely based on that, or that they hadn't won before, or just, someone knocked Curry off his pedestal, whatever it was. And the Stanley Cup Finals, it's just not like that.
No.
It's the most hardcore of the hardcore, watch it. And otherwise, you're just not interested.
And the whole thing, right, is when you're doing this in any sport, the broadcaster job is to build the storyline, right? If you're doing the pregame for the NHL, it's like holy shit! Look at this matchup we have tonight. And there's for the local markets, you don't have to do that. Like if Dallas and Tampa are playing, people from Dallas and people from Tampa are excited.
Oh, of course.
But your goal as the national broadcaster, your ESPNs, your TNTs, your Sportsnets, is to pull everybody else in. Okay, we're gonna see Jamie Benn. Whose head is he gonna hack off tonight? Right? Is Tyler? Is Jake Ottinger the real deal? Is Victor Hedman, who I'm just making this up? This is a fake Stanley Cup in my head.
Did you do the Stars versus the Lightning?
Yeah, I know that happened, but I'm just saying, like, if it happened this year, which is possible, is Jake Ottinger ready for the big time?
Whoa.
Is Victor Hedman going to get back from an injury to 80% of what he was?
Whoa.
All that stuff. You're trying to build that excitement, like, all the things that you as a fan are excited about. But I do feel like the best teams suck up the most airtime. Right? We're always talking about the best teams because they're more fun to talk about than the teams that are losing, except in exceptional cases. And you take the best teams out in the first couple rounds. They're the ones we've been following all year.
Yeah, that second round is where all of the best matchups happen in terms of seeding. If you have the top seeds from one division end up as the top teams in the conference, like you're asking for that second round to be the highlight matchups. And that's not the way the sport should be laid out in terms of the playoff format.
And you know what's kind of terrifying about the ratings and everything? I was thinking back to last year's playoffs, and you brought up the playoff tree, and it just brought back memories. Last year's Stanley Cup playoffs were incredible.
They were.
Yeah, that first round was absolutely fantastic.
They were really good. And if you can't sign people up to watch what the NHL was able to produce last year, you're in huge trouble.
But this is the thing, Steve. What if those happen rather than all in the first round?
It built?
What if it was a build? Like what if it's like I'm watching the first round just to see what could happen in the second round, and oh my God, can you imagine the third? That's the point. And I know there's going to be a lot of comments in here like, you guys are Leaf fans, you're bummed about getting booted in the first round. 100% that's true. But you can't tell me that St. Louis is thrilled about it.
No.
From 10 years ago.
No.
Or that who are the other teams I mentioned?
Well, it was basically a three-way knife fight between St. Louis, Chicago, and LA for
6 years.
Yeah, I was about to say half a decade, but that's not long enough.
Yeah.
And that kind of sucks.
So it does, and that's where you want to build to that, because you want to be like, okay, the Leafs. Okay, sure, they finished second in the conference and they're playing the 7th seed, and they'll probably dispatch them quickly. But if they do, who are they going to have to play? The big, scary Bruins. And so be ready to watch, because even if they win, it's still scary. And that builds over. Instead of 2 weeks of great hockey, you get 4.
They're trying to force a rivalry, and by doing that, they take the fire out of it. The best rivalry growing up, Detroit versus Colorado.
Oh, that was good.
Two star-studded teams who want to tear each other's friggin' head off. So the NHL designed a league that forced them to play each other. No, they did not. The league was as the league was, and they consistently met in the
Where?
Western Conference Final because they were the two best teams.
Yep.
The Red Wings cleave their way through the first 2 rounds, and the Avalanche bash their way up the mountain, and they would meet in this Clash of the Titans, and then it's the Stanley Cup Final. These two teams who had to war their way through their respective conferences, and unfortunately,
And you talk about division rivalries. It's not as though that didn't exist 25 years ago. This is the funny part, is that like we've been watching long enough to remember that I remember that Toronto and Ottawa met like 4 or 5 straight years.
Oh, yeah.
And they were great.
There's a lot.
They
and
were
it just
great
sort
years.
of happened that way.
And it would be in the second round because everything's just a little more amped up every round you go to, right?
Yeah.
It's a little more fired up. And then who met in the third round in 1998-99? Toronto Buffalo. A crazy series.
Yep.
A
That
crazy
was a
series.
great
and guess
series.
what? They're in the same division. And they always have been. And this is what it is. It's like if they're gonna meet anyway, guys.
Yeah.
They're gonna meet anyway.
The
Just
NBA
let
does
them
not
meet.
have this problem.
No, they don't. Because they don't have this division system.
Like, you have players in interviews openly talking 3 rounds into the future in January. That's nuts. But it's fuel to the fire for whoever they play in the first round and the second round. And if it turns out to be, oh God, who was it? Someone was talking about they're not worried about anyone in the West. So they're looking
John
at
Morant.
No,
It was John Morant?
Yeah.
So they're talking about John Morant was talking about, I think he had his eyes on the Celtics.
Mm.
So imagine the being able to use that soundbite if Ja makes it to play the Celtics in the NBA final.
Right.
How good.
The
that is.
division thing, them forcing these division matchups doesn't make sense either, too. Because, like, okay, we're forcing all these division matchups, we're creating these rivalries against these teams, but like Toronto and Florida are in the same division. Like, what if you forced it so we got Toronto, Florida all the time? Like, I feel like you can't set up the schedule to force rivalries. They just happen because teams happen just to play each other. Stop forcing all these things.
Rivalries
don't
begin
really exist.
oftentimes in the playoffs too,
Yeah.
right? They start to hate each other after Game 5, Game 6, Game 7.
But weirdly, what Leaf game out of any is much must-watch viewing?
Boston, Toronto, Winnipeg, Toronto.
Winnipeg.
Yeah, and that just happens because they hate each other.
It just happens because they hate each other. Now, they did stick them in a division in a very unique situation where they had to play like 9 times. But they hate each other. And it's great. And it's only coming twice a year. There's one in Toronto, there's one in Winnipeg.
Makes it special, doesn't it?
Makes it special. Makes it special. The Leafs Canucks a few years ago.
Oh, that was great.
Mhm.
But they played in like October, and then the air was out of the balloon when they played again in March.
I was at that game when they went back to March because
Oh,
they
yeah?
had the big
Oh, that's
fight.
right.
Remember, I was there. Yeah,
That's
and
right.
then they had the big fight in the fall.
Matt
and
Martin, Erica Branson
Yeah.
was the follow-up.
then they went out west, and it was a limp
Yeah.
performance by everybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't know when those are going to happen, but they
Right.
happen organically, is I guess what I'm saying. You can't force it. I kind of think, like, geez, it's the NHL. They practically become friends the more they play each other.
Uh-huh.
How would Kaprizov react in a tense playoff series?
He's great in the playoffs.
I don't. Depends. Is he interested?
Oh, he's interested. Come on.